Welcome to the Times of Israel's daily briefing. Today is Wednesday, January 22nd, day 474 of the war. Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our military reporter Emanuel Fabian and settlements reporter Jeremy Sharon. Hello to you both.
Hi, Amanda.
Good morning, Amanda.
On the second half of today's daily briefing, we're going to concentrate on the West Bank on both sides of the issue, the Palestinian and the Jewish residents of it. Manny will fill us in on the ongoing widespread IDF operations in the Palestinian city of Janine and its surroundings, and Jeremy will focus on extremist Jewish settler violence. But first, we'll learn about the events of last night's terror stabbing in Tel Aviv and who neutralized the Moroccan stabber. And in a bombshell announcement yesterday, IDF Chief of Staff Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi and the head of the IDF Southern Command said they would both be resigning from the military over their roles in the failures that led to the Hamas terror group's October 7th, 2023 onslaught. 4 people were wounded yesterday evening by a terrorist who went on a stabbing spree in a trendy Tel Aviv neighborhood. An off-duty IDF tank officer who had lost a hand during fighting in the Gaza Strip was among those who attempted to neutralize the terrorist. Manny, what can you tell us about last night's stabbing?
So it's pretty unusual for a foreigner to carry out an attack in Israel. It's something we have seen before, especially in the past year, but still an unusual case. A Moroccan national who was holding a green card. He arrived at the Nahalat Binyamin area in Tel Aviv, lots of restaurants there, very active at this hour. And he tried to stab people who were at restaurants and on a nearby street. He was running around trying to attack people. So 4 people were wounded in the attack, 2 in moderate condition, 2 in good condition. And he was shot dead. It's not quite clear who exactly shot him dead. There was kind of conflicting reports. Some said it was an off-duty border police officer, and others said it was some other off-duty soldiers. But there was like you said, an off-duty tank officer who had been wounded in Gaza, who was among those who chased him down. He's actually one of the victims, one of the lightly wounded victims. He tried to chase down the terrorist, and eventually he was shot dead. Right now, the Shin Bet actually investigating as to why he was let into the country. So what we know is that when this terrorist arrived in Israel, he was named as Abdelaziz Qadi, and he entered Israel on January 18th, so on Saturday, with a tourist visa. From what we understand, he was actually blocked by the officials at the airport because he didn't have anyone to visit here. He didn't have a hotel address. He didn't have family here or friends here or anything. So he was flagged, sent to the Shin Bet for questioning, and then the Shin Bet has responded and said that he was interrogated. They did some checks, but they decided that there was no grounds to hold him, and they allowed him into the country. And a few days later, he carried out the attack. So now the Shin Bet is investigating its protocols and to make sure that this sort of incident doesn't happen again.
What weight do you think that the green card carried in letting him into the country?
I'm not quite certain, to be honest, because he wouldn't have entered with an American passport because he's not an American citizen. He holds a U.S. residency. So I think he entered with his Moroccan passport. I saw reports that he arrived via a connection from Poland. So I'm not really sure what the Shin Bet was thinking when it allowed him to enter the country, especially with these sort of warning signs that he didn't have anybody to visit here, and it was an unusual case. But it may be related to the green card. Maybe they saw the green card and that's why they decided to allow him in.
Please check out our live blog for more updates. Now, Manny, yesterday, Chief of Staff Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi and the head of the IDF Southern Command Major General Yaron Finkelman both announced their resignations 15 months into the war sparked by Hamas's attack, and 2 days after a ceasefire and hostage release deal with the terror group in the Gaza Strip went into effect. So Halevi resigned in a letter to Defense Minister Yisrael Katz, and he said he would leave the IDF on March 6th, but I think we didn't yet hear a date from Finkelman. Is that correct, Manny?
That's correct. So Halevi said that on March 6th he will leave. That is, it comes right at the end of the first stage of the ceasefire deal with Hamas. So it would be right after that. possibly into the second stage if that happens. Whereas Finkelman in his letter said that he would stay as long as needed. From what I understand, Finkelman also has been planning to leave for months now. Since the beginning of the war, he's been considering resigning. Same with Halevi, but he didn't want to do it first. He wanted to wait for Halevi to first announce that he was resigning and then to also issue his, because it would seem like he was trying to outdo Halevi and be the first one. So he wanted to wait with that. And I think there's many other officers as well who are also considering their resignation, but have been waiting for Halevi to do so before they also announce their resignation. So up until March 6th, Halevi says he will be completing the army's investigations into October 7th, will be preparing the military for the future challenges, and will also be doing a handover with his replacement. The interesting thing is that this is only going to be a month and a bit handover, which is very short considering normally it's about 3 months, sometimes even 4 months of a handover. For really the process of choosing a new chief of staff usually takes quite a long time, and this is a very expedited process this time. We still don't know who's going to be replacing Halevi. There have been certain names that have been brought up, but we don't really know any of them for sure yet, or even if they want to. Katz says he'll be interviewing them already within the coming days, so we should see this process really be very quick, and we'll know who the next chief of staff is within the next couple of weeks.
But if, as you mentioned, several other officers are also expected to tender their resignations, it seems like the pool is going to be rather small, especially since it has to come from within the standing army. Isn't that correct?
That's correct. So there are a few names who have been brought up, and they're sort of officers who are, I would say, not really tied to the October 7th failures. So the first one, who's, I guess, considered the front runner, his name has been brought up several times, is Eyal Zamir, who's currently the Director General of the Defense Ministry. He was a former Deputy Chief of Staff. He was twice passed over the role for Chief of Staff in the past. And his name has been brought up several times. Another name is Amir Baram, who's currently Halevi's deputy. He asked to end his role at the end of February. And he has indicated that he wants to replace Halevi. I'm not sure if he actually will, because he, of course, was Deputy Chief of Staff on October 7th as well. So he is sort of somewhat considered close to the failures. And another candidate is Ori Gorodin, who's the current head of the Northern Command. Of course, as Northern Command Chief, he was not involved in the failures of October 7th in the South, considered a well-respected officer. And he's definitely a candidate. Before being the Northern Command Chief, he was also the Home Front Command Chief. So he's already done several senior roles in the military. So it is possible that he will be the next head, or maybe even the next deputy, as Baram is resigning from his role.
And what do we know about Finkelman? Is he the officer who was very critical of the government at one point during the war, or am I mistaking him with somebody else?
No, I don't think that was him. Especially officers in the army are not supposed to be, at least publicly, critical of the government. He's been the head of the Southern Command. It was right before the war. He was actually entered the role just a few months beforehand. So he's resigning, of course, over the failures. But I think another officer we need to look out for who will also be resigning is Eliezer Toledano, who was the Southern Command Chief and the Gaza Division Chief before that, before Finkelman, and definitely involved in the whole process that led to October 7th. Of course, October 7th wasn't something that just happened overnight. It's years of a failure, not just one night of a failure. So he's currently still in the army. He's the head of the strategy division. I think we'll also see him potentially also resign from the IDF.
Let's go to a short break.
We, the Holocaust survivors, are a rapidly diminishing group. We are in the last moments of being able to share with our young people our first-hand testimonies. Time is rapidly running out. Each year sees smaller numbers of survivors able to accompany students on the March of the Living. Marching with students and survivors from many countries in those terrible places allows our students to learn and understand through stories and eyewitness accounts about our resilience, our strength, and our determination.
This Yom HaShoah, the Jewish Holocaust Remembrance Day, many survivors like Ava want to march at the International March of the Living in Auschwitz. They need your help. To sponsor a survivor on the March of the Living, go to motl.org.
And we're back. Let's turn to the West Bank. And on Sunday night, an Israeli reservist soldier was killed and 4 others were wounded, including a senior officer in serious condition when they were hit by a roadside bomb. And yesterday, the IDF launched a major counterterrorism operation in the northern West Bank city of Janine, which military sources are saying is expected to last several days. So, Manny, this isn't the first time that the IDF is operating in the West Bank in this manner, even since October 7th. And what do you see as the aims of this operation?
So this operation it's similar to many others carried out in Janine and in other areas, but it is definitely on a larger scale. Large numbers of forces, special forces. It began with several drone strikes in Janine. We've seen footage of army helicopters flying over the area. And sources have said that it is expected to last several days. They've also said it will last as long as needed, but at least several days. We saw really not long ago a large operation in Janine. I was in Janine during that operation as well. I got to go and see, but that was relatively small scale, only in one area of the refugee camp. This is supposed to be something much larger, and I think I mentioned on the podcast a few days ago that because of the ceasefire in Gaza, a lot of the army's attention will now be in the West Bank. Halevi, just a couple of days ago, said that the army is preparing for significant operations in the West Bank in order to prevent Hamas from gaining a foothold there. Of course, during the ceasefire, hundreds of Palestinian prisoners, including terrorists, are being released. Many of them are members of Hamas, and they're being released back to the West Bank. So there's a major concern that their release will sort of spark and sort of uprising, and Hamas would gain a lot of power in the West Bank. So this is one of the goals of this operation, is to prevent that. And it is being coordinated with the Palestinian Authority. The PA was operating in Janine up until a few days ago, so they withdrew when the army went in. Because from what the army is saying, the PA is also concerned that Hamas will gain power in the West Bank. They are, of course, rivals. So that's one of the main goals. Another one is to basically eliminate any of these imminent threats. So there are terror groups in Janine that are planning attacks against Israel, against settlements, against troops. And the army wishes to reach these terrorists and eliminate them before they can carry out their attacks.
Of course, that's only one side of the West Bank. And as discussed yesterday on the podcast, U.S. President Donald Trump revoked the executive order that was signed a year ago by Biden to impose sanctions against violent Israeli Jewish settlers in the West Bank. Jeremy, ironically, that order was signed as dozens of extremist settlers were conducting an attack on 2 West Bank Palestinian villages in which IDF troops also came under attack. According to the IDF, a probe found that dozens of Israeli citizens, some of them masked, arrived at night to Al-Fundak and set fire to property and caused damage. What else can you tell us about this event?
So this is the latest in a series of attacks across West Bank Palestinian villages. We know, obviously, in the attack on Monday night in Jinsafut and Al-Fundak, that 2 Israelis, apparently the extremists involved in the attack, were shot during the incident. The circumstances are not quite clear, but initial police investigations and IDF investigations show that the assailants pepper sprayed one of the police officers who was trying to apparently chase them and prevent their violent activities. And this is obviously a very severe incident, which we're still not entirely sure of the full details of what happened, but there is a internal police investigation and an internal military investigation into what happened. But as I said, this is just the latest of a series of violent settler attacks. Just on Sunday night, there was attacks in 3 West Bank villages in Turmus Aya, Sinjil and Ein Sinya, which is in the central West Bank, where also, again, homes were set on fire, vehicles were set ablaze. The extremists threw stones at residential buildings and also at Palestinian drivers driving on Route 60. And then again, then back a couple of Saturdays ago on January 11th, there was another attack again in Turmus Aya, where at least a dozen extremists managed to get into the village and threw stones. And one of those stones, I spoke to the mother of of a boy, a 16-year-old boy who was injured in that attack, and it seems that he was hit with a stone flung by a slingshot. It really crushed his skull. He needed 3.5 hours of surgery to his head. They had to clean out bone fragments from his head, from around his brain. They had to open up his head in a different location in order to properly remove all of the bone fragments. I spoke to his mother, and she said, it feels like our lives are cheap. They're not worth anything. Their kids go out to play, and they don't know if they're going to come back alive. So, this is a phenomenon which has been growing and getting worse. And in the last couple of days, we've seen just how bad the situation is getting.
Now, when we're talking about West Bank Jewish settlers, the vast majority live in actually built-up cities, such as Beitar Illit, which is a Haredi stronghold, or Modi'in Illit, another Haredi stronghold city. There could be Ma'ale Adumim. There are actually cities in the West Bank. And in terms of the profile of the extremist settler, we're being told that Monday night's event was conducted by dozens of extremist settlers. How many extremist settlers could there be? How many are there? Do you have any sense?
We're not talking about a big number. We're really not. I couldn't tell you really any kind of close number. It's either hundreds or in the low thousands. I don't think we're talking about any more than that. But we are talking about a concerted group of extremely radical activists, many of whom are involved in setting up these illegal outposts, many of which are farming outposts, herding outposts designed to take control of large parts of Palestinian land, and in order to drive out any Palestinians in areas C and possibly even areas B, who are kind of interrupting Israeli settlement and territorial contiguity. And so we're talking about youngsters who've probably been radicalized in various ways in the West Bank, in this milieu of the kind of greater land of Israel movement, which seeks to remove Palestinians from as large a part of the West Bank as possible, to establish Jewish settlements and Jewish control, Israeli control over the whole territory. So we are talking about a minority. They're often very young. We're also talking about a lot of young men, often even, school, at the age of school, 15, 16, 17 even. But also we're talking about young families. I interviewed a young woman from the outpost of Sde Ephraim, and, she moved into this, kind of desolate hilltop outpost a few years ago. She was pregnant at the time, and, there's no facilities, no infrastructure. They had to go, when she went to the hospital, she had to drive to, I think it was Tel Aviv Hospital. She left in the middle of the night in the car, and there's no lights on the kind of treacherous pathway which led down from the outpost to the paved road. So we're talking about very ideological people. The extremists are almost exclusively religious and extremely religious, extremely ideologically devoted to the cause of settling the entire land of Israel and establishing Jewish control over the entire land of Israel. And they're extremely antagonistic to their Palestinian neighbors. They don't believe that the Palestinians have any right to live in the land. And they, what this woman from Sde told me is, which, she wants to make the lives of Palestinians as difficult as possible. in order to basically to make sure that eventually that they leave, because they do not want them living here.
This young woman isn't necessarily, of course, going and torching buildings and setting cars on fire, but this is the kind of ideology that you're talking about. And within that ideological group, the subset would be those who are actually committing the violence. Now, what's interesting is how it's reported globally. And I mentioned to both of you this morning before we began our podcast that I heard on a BBC Global podcast this morning that I believe it was the mayor of Al Fundak. He was saying that these extremist settlers were being escorted by IDF soldiers. Now, Manny, can you dispel that myth and tell me if there is any legs to this at all?
I would say there's sort of some truth to this, meaning that often in these cases of when we see dozens of Israeli settlers carrying out attack in a Palestinian village, soldiers are dispatched to the area, but oftentimes they don't actually arrest anybody, and oftentimes you can see soldiers standing alongside the settlers as they carry out attacks. That is something we've seen many times before. In the case in Al Fundak, from what the army said, it sent troops and border police officers to the area. They used riot dispersal means and cleared out the gathering. Nobody was arrested, but that may have been sort of the escorting was the troops escorting them out of the village.
Meaning trying to reduce the violence from both sides and getting people out without harm. What kind of tools does the army actually have here? It's a very tricky situation. We have Israeli citizens versus Palestinian non-citizens. So what could be done in that kind of situation?
Very, very little right now. The army doesn't really have the tools to deal with this. It knows how to fight terror, right? That's its goal. It knows how to battle terror groups in the West Bank. It doesn't really know how to deal with Israelis being violent against Palestinians. Its focus isn't even there. And I've spoken to several former commanders of the Central Command. They've all told me the same thing, is that the army is looking towards the Palestinian towns and not towards the Israeli settlements. They just don't have that kind of focus. It is something that the army has often blamed the police on, saying that the police should be the ones dealing with this. It's a law enforcement matter. It's not a security threat to Israel kind of matter. It's still obviously terrorism when people are setting fire to homes and attacking innocent people. But there has been a lot of talk in the army trying to tell the police for them to deal with it instead. Unfortunately, as we know, and I'm sure Jeremy could tell you a lot more about this, the police have very little presence in the West Bank. They don't have that many forces there. Very, very limited amount of officers in the West Bank. So it's really a matter of trying to put the focus there and dealing with the issue. And of course, this all kind of also goes back to, like you mentioned, we've mentioned before, Israel cuts the defense minister cancelling the use of administrative detention orders against settlers it was a sort of tool to be able to prevent these attacks. Now that's been removed, so it's a huge problem.
Right. And Jeremy, one final thing before we close, we're going a bit long, is, of course, there is the prisoner releases, and many of these prisoners who are being released during this hostage release ceasefire deal have blood on their hands, and much of that blood did occur in the West Bank. And I wonder if you're seeing this as any kind of motivating factor in terms of the uptick of extremist Jewish settler violence against Palestinians recently.
Yeah, that's certainly the case. Especially, I saw that explicitly on Sunday night when one of these extremist groups, which they actually have a kind of a PR operation, put out statements following these attacks, saying that they were kind of protesting the celebrations in some Palestinian towns of returning prisoners who were released under the hostage prisoner release deal, and they said they complained that the police, the army, weren't cracking down enough on these celebrations, which they describe as incitement, and they said that that if the army doesn't spoil and destroy these, ruin these celebrations, then we'll take it into our own hands. But I would just come back and say, in terms of the IDF, I hear often from Palestinian activists and human rights groups that, okay, so the police aren't on the ground, and by the way, that's a deliberate decision not to have large numbers of police resources in the West Bank. But even, let's say, when the police aren't on the ground and the IDF are, obviously the IDF sees its mission as defending Israeli citizens. But you're having, when you have a situation where extremists are harassing and being violent towards Palestinian civilians, the Palestinians see it as just part of, that from their perspective, it's the IDF participating in efforts to harass them, be violent towards them, and essentially push them off the land. And I think that is a problem when the IDF does not intervene, especially when the police is not on the ground. That's part of the lack of enforcement problem, that the IDF doesn't intervene. There's no police resources, and even the resources that the police does devote, numerous reports from civil rights groups that police don't come to the site of an attack. They don't take evidence. They don't take testimony. It's incredibly hard to file a complaint in the first place. People, the Yesh Din organization, which campaigns against the settlements, recently published a report. 94% of police investigations which are opened are closed without charges. So, for a Palestinian to come and actually bother to make a complaint, for them it just seems completely pointless because nothing will ever happen in the first place. So you've got like a vicious circle of a lack of enforcement, which is just exacerbating the problem. There's no accountability. None of the very few people ever brought to justice. There's cases I've covered where an incident was caught on camera of a man in Atwani in the South Hebron Hills, shot in the stomach by a settler from a nearby outpost, and I think that was just after October 7th, and 16, 17 months later, and he still hasn't been indicted, even though the police know who he is. There's video evidence on camera, and so on. So I think the lack of enforcement is one of the primary problems in how this problem of settler violence has gone rampant and been left unchecked.
Let's see if the next national security minister makes any kind of changes on this front. Jeremy, Manny, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Amanda.
Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. Please check out another installment tomorrow. This episode was produced by the Podwaves. If you have any questions or comments about this or any other episode, please drop us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. Until tomorrow, shalom.